This is the Vanguard podcast. I'm Gavin.
And I'm Zac.
And today we're super excited to welcome to the stream Tyrel Ventura. He's the co-host of Watching the Hawks on RT America and the son of Jesse the Body Ventura, one of our big idols here at the Vanguard. We're one of our heroes. Thanks so much for your time this morning or this afternoon, Tyrel. How's it going, man?
It's good. It's good. How are you guys doing out there? Where are you guys at? You Zac Gavin, where are you?
We're in Kansas City.
Ooh, Kansas City. You know, it's interesting. Funny that you say Kansas City. Sorry for the mess and all that behind me. This is from the bunker here in Washington.
Shirt. That's all I've noticed.
Washington, D.C. Yeah. No, got the Pulp Fiction. Somewhere behind me, there's an old standee, a Jurassic Park 2 when I used to work at a video store when those existed. Yes, I'm that old.
Hey, I saw you used to work for Sean Penn, right? The director?
Yes, I did.
That's cool.
I was going to say about Kansas City, that's actually the, if I'm not mistaken, that's the first place that's where my father started his wrestling career.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
was there
back in the early 70s.
Was there like a wrestling arena here that would have been the venue for that? Like
that was back in the old like territory days,
uh-huh.
and so there was I don't know what the arena would be over there back in the early 70s, mid 70s, but yeah, that's where he left Minnesota with $50 in his pocket in his car and started his illustrious career.
Wow. Yeah, and we don't have to talk about your dad this whole episode at all, but I did want to ask what it was like. Just being the son of Governor Ventura, while he was the governor of Minnesota, that must have been a very interesting experience from your perspective.
It was a truly fascinating and beautiful experience in my life. I look back on it with a lot of just very good memories and very good. It had its ups and downs dealing with the two-party system as an independent. Put a lot of stress on my father. But our family core never lost who we were, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, one minute you're, meeting George Bush Jr. on the tarmac because he decided to come visit the state, and the next, I think in the same week or not that long after, I was having breakfast with the Dalai Lama. So it was a pretty interesting time to be, 19.
What does the Dalai Lama eat for breakfast, Tyrel?
From what did he have? I want to say like he had a couple muffins and maybe a croissant, but don't quote me on that.
Right on. Anyway, we did have you on to talk about watching Hawks and the foreign policy of the day. So if you want to kick that off, Gavin.
Yeah, indeed. So I was actually watching the most recent episode of Watching the Hawks, which, by the way, for anyone that's not aware, is a wonderfully underrated show on RT America. It's actually some fantastic programming, great content. It's very informative, great opinions. It really.
Yeah, we were just talking actually. If you like foreign policy and your least favorite part about the show Rising is Sagar, you would love Watching the Hawks.
Yeah, it needs to be more widely seen among kind of like the breadtube space. It's not really discovered in my opinion, but yeah, guys, check that out if you haven't. But anyway, in the most recent episode, you guys are actually having a fascinating conversation about automation and especially the increasing prominence of social robots, which you described as like a super-powered Alexa. It's more than just a disembodied voice. It actually is full-body humanist whatever robot. And the conversation that you guys were having, your guest and co-host, it was kind of about these like more sci-fi possibilities of AI tech gone wrong, what could happen when AI becomes sentient and all that stuff. But what I'm more concerned about, at least in the interim and until we get to that point, is all these uber enhanced AI technologies and the potential for mass data mining, facial and biological recognition databases, all of which could, easily be sold off to the highest bidder.
Or and more open air prisons.
Yeah. And all of these things could lead to equally dystopian possibilities as, killer sex robots or whatever. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that and the increasing, data collection state of everything.
Well, Edward Snowden obviously, showed us just how far the U.S. government and other governments around the world are willing to go to know everything about what we do online. For some reason, it hasn't stopped as much terrorism that we know of, which is always interesting. The government's going to be incredibly invasive, and that's where it really falls on us, the people, to be able to kind of make sure we keep them in check as best we can with the limited amount of power that we have. Where do I think it's going to go? It's like the Spider-Man quote with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that it's only going to exponentially get larger and larger and larger. I mean, it's kind of funny to me when people talk about, they can track us or they can see what I'm doing and all that kind of thing. Or what was the big rumor? Oh, the vaccinations, we're going to have implants that could track us around. Well, we're tracked by our cell phones every day of our lives. They keep a very, long running log of everywhere we go, everywhere we do, every credit card we use. So really you have to kind of not accept the fact that no matter what you do, unless you're completely off the grid, you're going to leave a signature. You're going to leave an imprint. There's not much you can do about that in today's day and age. So I believe what people have to do is they have to hold their governments accountable, and they have to hold the elected officials accountable for that. Now, how do we do that in today's day and age? That's another conundrum and a mystery we're going to have to face. That's electing the right people. That's getting behind, anybody but Democrats and Republicans to a certain degree, and really pushing for candidates that will ultimately tell us the truth about what's going on, or they ultimately will fight for what we elected them to do, and not kind of just make the ever standard campaign trail of promises that are always seem to be broken the moment they get into office.
Yeah, and we can get into some of those broken promises, I'm sure. But to stay on the more dystopian kind of horrifying tone for a moment, I think you guys also covered this on your show. And it kind of makes sense, right? So in Nevada, there's talk of these innovation zones where they're going to be run on cryptocurrency. The governor's getting behind it, and to some degree, if you compartmentalize everything else, you do understand that Nevada's been economically devastated because tourism has hit a standstill. Much of Nevada's economy is concentrated into the Las Vegas area, so the governor is trying to make up for lost income, and naturally he's looking to billionaires, because that's what happens in this country. And so he's decided that as long as you can put $250 million down and promise $1 billion over the next however many years, then you can basically create your own government. And this just sounds horrifying to me, right? Like if Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are getting into a room and now they're the president. I mean, this is some of the most horrifying things. And you actually on your show, I believe, observed that this could lead to 20, 30 years indentured servitude, slavery, quite simply because they would just guise it under the fact that, they owe money, they can't leave. We talked about facial recognition, they'll know as soon as you try and leave. Oh, sorry, you're not allowed to leave until you've paid off your debt, right? This idea of debt, which would make it all justified, whatever horror these people were experiencing.
I think I said it on the show. It reminded me a lot of if you went further enough back in the Alien timeline, it's like, well, this is how Weyland-Yutani got started. This is, the moment that cities and counties and states for as long as we can remember, and the federal government for that matter, with federal contracts, they've been they've been giving tax breaks and just basically handing over the keys to cities for as far back as we can remember, when it comes to big corporations moving in under the promise of jobs and things like that. But when you start saying that, yes, this corporation will have the same power as a county if it owns this much land in the state, and that raises a host of really disturbing questions, because at the end of the day, how do the people have power within that county? And as you mentioned, when I kind of got into the indentured servitude aspect of that conversation on Hawks, it really became this idea, well, how it's going to work. I mean, we even kind of saw it prophesized in the movie that came out last year about the young black man who was working in the telemarketing service. I can't remember the name of it.
Sorry.
The Booth Riley film.
Booth Riley's film, yeah. And it kind of got into that idea that, what's going to happen when, I'm going to go to work for, let's say, Walmart in Nevada or other states that may adopt this principle, but Walmart has the same power as a county. Okay, well, that means they're going to have their own, county sheriffs, county security. All right, well, they're going to give me this great, free, cheap place to live while I work for them. I mean, Walmart is a great example because they do everything they can to make sure that their employees are only spending their money at Walmart, or, they don't let them leave. A lot of them, from what I remember, don't let them leave the grounds to go on lunch break or anything like that. You got to go and shop within the store to get your food, or you bring your food from home if you're, have time to do that. But at the end of the day, they want to just consolidate and kind of create this money loop.
Kind of harkens back to the 1800s, right? With what was those boss towns, where yes. You get company dollars, and that was obviously outlawed, but we're almost regressing back to a Gilded Age kind of time period.
We truly are. And why are we seeing that? Well, because all of the money is flowing upwards. When you create robber barons that we've created, and look, it's not, I'll probably get flamed like hell for saying this, but I don't think anyone wakes up and says, I want to start a business so I can rule the world, or I want to have outlandish power and twirl my evil mustache and say, how can I fuck over people as much as I can? But I think what you're seeing is an addiction to money.
Yeah.
I've been very candid about, I spent 10 years as an alcoholic in my life and thankfully got into recovery and beat that. Well, and am no longer an alcoholic, but when you can recognize patterns and things. And what I see in a lot of the CEOs or a lot of the people running corporations or your Wall Street bankers, things of that nature, you see this addiction to money that kind of overrides everything else. And so that's where you suddenly have them, putting so much pressure on states that states are willing to say, hey, we'll give you the same power as a county government.
It's the logical conclusion of this incredible empowerment of corporate America and of multinational corporations in general. I mean, obviously, it's kind of this dystopian possibility or nightmare that I always think about. It's like, at what point will the corporations be so big, so multinational that they will just say no to the government, to regulations or to
they already have
whatever.
though. They already have though. Look at what happened in California. They said no. They changed the law after they put $200 million fucking dollars into it, and they're about to do the same thing in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And honestly,
they already they don't even have to say no, because when you have to also, what people also don't realize, because we get so kind of caught up in the left-right fight, that, as many have said before, and I've seen, and my father's seen personally, the same companies give roughly the same amount of money to both parties. Yeah. Because then it doesn't mean that every single Democrat who gets elected or every single Republican who gets elected is going to be, totally in bed with as an individual with that money, but their party is, because their party is never going to give up that spigot. Look, as long as we have the system of currency and the way it's being run, you're always going to see this. And if you go back in time, really, is it any that different than the feudal system we saw, in England and things like that? It really is. And then that's just kind of always been that progression. I think that our technology and that our freedom to buy things has kind of diluted that over the years, and it's an ebb and flow, and sometimes we have a lot more freedom, sometimes we don't, but until we figure out a new way of I guess, for lack of a better term, organizing society, we're kind of stuck with this, and until we get some great minds and really get some good people, doesn't necessarily mean they have to be college university minds, but until we really get some really dynamic people and to think a new way of doing things, like for all of their flaws, you still have, you had a pocket of people at the beginning of this country that said, hey, there might be a better way to do it than the feudal system. Let's try that. Let's go back to what Plato and Socrates were talking about, and maybe bring back some of the democracy elements that we've been lacking over the years. Until we see that again, that spark of real cultural and significant change, we're going to be kind of stuck into variations of this feudal system that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's an absolutely prescient diagnosis for sure. Just to go back to AI a little bit, I wanted to get your opinion on our military's increased use of AI-powered war machines, and especially I'm concerned that it's going to massively decrease the visibility of our foreign policy here in America to those of us that are domestic. Obviously, it's a good thing that American troops won't be being slaughtered for no reason, but when people aren't coming home, maimed or with mental illness, or aren't coming home, at all because they're not even being shipped over, it's much less visible to our society, the true consequences and effect of war. And I'm just wondering, what is the state of the anti-war movement here in America when all of our imperialist foreign policy is being carried out by drones and automated tech? And especially since the media won't turn an eye towards these stories. We recently saw the New York Times completely cut their war reporting. It's a pretty common trend. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts are this, is that it kind of falls in, as you're saying, into that classic mode of our government learned their lesson from Vietnam. You don't show the body bag. You keep the media into a certain amount of control, or you don't allow them to see the body bags come home, because when people see the body bags come home and there's a draft, then suddenly the war hits your neighborhood, as opposed to being something on TV. I think that with AI, I think you're very correct in that it allows, and it also kind of, again, it's how many generals sit in a room and say, well, casualties are casualties, they're part of war. How many defense contractors sit in the boardroom and realize, or the people working in the factories and say, wow, we're creating weapons that kill massive amounts of people on a daily basis, and that's how I get my paycheck. How do I look myself in the mirror every day? By creating AI technology, that kind of even insulates them a little bit more. Well, the AI made the decision. The AI, they always kind of case it in that kind of smart weapon thing. No, the less civilian casualties because the computer knows exactly who to hit. Well, what if who you're hitting isn't necessarily the bad guy?
Yeah, like 90% of drone strikes kill civilians, I think.
And even then, it's like, and even go to like, okay, let's say you do see, you are targeting the right person and no civilians get killed, but then you get into the moral quandary of, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? Yeah. So, then that there creates that element too. And so what AI does is it kind of gives more of those barriers and more of those kind of things to allow people to kind of, oh, it's not that bad, oh, no, it's way over there, or, oh, I'm so detached from it. But as we've found, even with drones, as we found, they still create a level of PTSD when you hear about the drone jockeys in the trailers in the middle of New Mexico and Arizona hitting a button all day, blowing people up, 12 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and they're coming out with a massive amount of PTSD. Because at the end of the day, it's never going to be a computer game. It's not Call of Duty. It is lives that you're snuffing out with every push of a button, or whether it's an programmed AI pushing that button. But look, let's be real. AI is still created by human beings at the end of the day. Yeah. It's not an entity that's separate from us. We created it. And so it's going to have our flaws built into it because
just look at the Facebook quote unquote algorithm. Oh, it's just the algorithm, right? You can see all of these human cultural imperfections that are so obviously and so ingrained in our culture and our ideology that it's passed on to the code subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we saw that with facial recognition technology too, where they did that study, and it was one of those weird things where all the programmers were Caucasian, so that the AI had a really good at recognizing Caucasian faces, but anything other than that, it totally shit the bed.
Yeah, and I was talking recently, or a couple months ago, rather, with a congressional candidate, Mia Mason, who was a veteran. I think she was in the Marines, maybe, and she was telling me that something that's a prototype, at least, is like literal like RoboCop or like Chappie style robots that are going to be like roaming the streets of our occupied countries. And yeah, of course, you're going to run into problems like that with facial recognition when they're programmed by Caucasian people with this bias, and then you send them to the Middle East, or like of course, disaster after disaster is only going to result in complete destruction.
With the cold precision of artificial intelligence and no human empathy at all. Human empathy at all. And that's my, one of my concerns, right? Because, through all the derangement that, and through all of the, lenses that, people view war when they're there, and there's, so much ideology and so much, distortion of reality and what you're doing and there's still always that human element, right? Like if you're a human being and you have to look at a 7-year-old kid, are you going to shoot him? I hope not, man. I hope not. And AI is not going to make that choice. That 7-year-old kid's not going to make it. So, it completely removes that. It's like it's this cold sterility that I think we have to be really afraid of.
I agree. It reminds me, I think it reminds me every innovation that society has had. And then it's important to remember this too, is that as we get really into this dystopian nightmare that we're describing, that look, for every person who's making a bomb that, a nuclear bomb that can be put into a suitcase, Larry King said this, and I passed away recently. Yeah. He said, like, we have to remember that in life, in this great, wondrous, mysterious thing we call life, and in society, for every person making a suitcase bomb that could kill 100,000 people, there's also someone working on a cure for cancer. Yeah. And sometimes those technologies overlap. It's really, it always, no matter what we do, it's always going to come circling back around to us, and you and I and all of us. It always is going to come back to that human element, no matter how detached we get. And ultimately, it's got to be on us to shepherd our advancement of technology in a way that is meant for the good of people. I mean, I think that look, I mean, the internet is an incredibly powerful thing that's allowed everyone on this earth to communicate with each other in a microsecond. Is it being used for bad? Yes. Is it being used for good? Yes. So ultimately, again, that responsibility falls back on us to be diligent in how we use our technology and how we allow technology to be used by our governments and by our leaders and by the people that we have put in charge. And if they're using it the wrong way, that's on us. And I'm probably stressing the idea that it's on us a lot because when you asked me earlier in the conversation about what it was like, being Jesse's son when he won and things like that, I will say this: it was magnificent seeing people from every walk of life vote for him and put him into office. I remember when we had the People's Party, which was like right after he won, rather than doing like a stuffy convention or election night inaugural party where people are in suits listening to chamber music. He had a rock concert and opened up the Target Center, and I think it was like $10 a ticket. It would go to charity and like all this thing, and you had every walk of life, there, all sitting next to each other, all celebrating this thing. But the thing that happened to my father that was really, really tough, and this is what people have to remember: just because you vote for someone doesn't mean it's a magic wand and they're going to solve all your problems, because he only had as much power as the people could give him, especially as an independent. So when he started getting into real just trench fights with Democrats and Republicans as governor, there was a lot of people that voted for him and then just kind of washed their hands and said, well, my job's done. And if you vote for someone you believe in, then you have to continue that diligence beyond the election booth and be there to hold the sign and protest, write your congressman, email them and all that, in order to say, no, I believe in what this person's doing and you better support them, or I'm going to make sure that you're voted out of office next. You have to, you can't just kind of elect the leader and walk away, is what I'm getting to.
For sure.
Yeah, and actually, I think you make a great point about the very diverse, ideologically diverse coalition that your father kind of built when he ran for that governorship. And it brings to mind a quote from John Avalon, who wrote a book called Independent Nation, where he described Jesse Ventura's politics as radical centrism. I'm wondering if you think that's an apt description, because I think in a way it is. He really does, or at least at the time, and still does, frankly. But he kind of bridges that more like pro freedom, like socially libertarian, like no government shouldn't be telling me what to do, but also is able to appeal to people. He's just able to appeal to people on both sides of the spectrum in a very interesting way, and certainly to working class people in a language that most politicians were never able to muster. And I'm wondering just what your thoughts are on that, and also what third party movements in the modern era could learn from your father's success running one of the an actual successful third party effort.
It's a great question. With my father, I think what people fail, everyone likes to kind of pigeonhole people into a certain, we love that, especially today. We're very, we've really kind of put the overdrive on tribalism to a certain degree, where it's like we try to pigeonhole people all the time. Oh, if they say they're for healthcare for all, well, then they got to be totally progressive on every other thing that they believe. Or if they say that they're for they back the soldiers, oh, well, then they must be complete wildly crazy righties. I think what we want to look for in candidates, and what my father was really great at, is he's an honest person who kind of said what his beliefs were at the time based on the information he had. It's interesting, as my father's gotten older, I think a lot of people kind of pegged him as like you kind of said, this more kind of radical libertarian, not deep libertarian, but like more of a libertarian belief system. But it's interesting because as my father's gotten over, he's definitely ventured far more, and even then was very much a progressive when it came to things like healthcare, and it came to things like that. Like I think his idea when he says government shouldn't be in legalization of marijuana, legalization of it, because in his mind it's like you can't, if making something illegal doesn't make it go away, and it just puts it in the hand of criminals. Where if you regulate something, then you're taking it out of the hands of criminals. Maybe you could argue that our government's just as criminal, but you're taking it out of, you're making it a safer thing at the end of the day. He's very pro Second Amendment, but at the same time, I think when he says, government should allow people to be individuals and allow them to do what they want, that doesn't mean that we let then everyone's individual and we just let society fail, and no one needs help, and no one needs a help up, and because the whole pulling yourself up by the bootstraps things is fucking crazy at this point. I mean, Jesus Christ, the bootstraps are, like I think I said the other day on the show, bootstraps now are tied around our necks, so the harder we try to pull them up, the more they choke us to death.
Yeah, we already got frostbite on our fucking feet.
Exactly, right? And so Jesse's belief system, and one thing that I really give my father credit for is that he will admit when he's wrong, or he'll admit that, say, I had a belief maybe 20 years ago that I don't share today. And I think that's the other thing we have to remember too with people, is that we have to also allow people to grow. A lot of times we kind of, once we have an idea of who somebody is and what their ideologies are, that's it. Yeah. And, if that person then deviates from that, whether for good or for bad, or whether they have they learned from something and said, oh, you know what, I used to believe that this was a rotten thing. Now I actually see the light in it. If we don't allow for that, then we're really fucked, because then how the hell are we ever going to build a better society if we don't allow the people that we might fight with today and allow them time to learn the error of their ways? I think a lot of times you see this, especially in the activist community, it's kind of this all or nothing. You either believe what I believe or to hell with you, and I'm violently against you, and I'm never going to actually help you learn to be a better person or learn why I believe what I believe is the better way to go. And that breaks my heart when you get into like kind of the political activist communities that again, they're very tribal. And if you stray a little bit from the correct path, they crucify you for it, rather than saying, well, why do you hold this kind of, why aren't you believing what I believe when it comes to this issue?
Well, I'm wondering also, because obviously your father is notorious for teasing runs for president. And he's gotten me excited and then dashed my hopes, a couple times now.
Sorry.
And I was just wondering if you had any insight into what went down with the whole Green Party thing. Like, was he really seriously trying to get that Green Party nomination, or do you think it was more of just like a publicity thing? Or I'm just interested, because to me, I was kind of pissed off by the Green Party, how they didn't seem to welcome him with open arms, despite the fact that he would have brought the Green Party so much credibility, or so much credence, so much attention. He would have energized people to sign up for it. It would have really been a big, boon.
And to be honest, we asked the Green Party about it when we had, or we didn't ask the Green Party. We asked Howie Hawkins himself on the show, because I think at one point he offered the nomination to Bernie Sanders, sort of, and then pretended he didn't, and then whatever also, that was.
And also, what pissed me off about Howie Hawkins' answer was he really just reduced your father to, he was like, well, we could nominate a celebrity, but I'm like, Jesse Ventura has actually held office.
Won an election.
Howie Hawkins was never actually an elected official. Jesse Ventura was a governor of a state. Like, what do you mean he's just a celebrity? This is a successful, third party candidate. What are you talking about? This man is, this is the path forward for a third party movement. If you want it, it's right here in front of you. But I was just wondering if you had any insight. Sorry to keep talking.
Oh no, that was one of those tough decisions for Jesse, because every time Jesse says something, he doesn't do something just for publicity. If he says he's curious and is interested in running for president, he's curious and interested in running for president. He doesn't do things for clicks, because, well, for one, he doesn't own a computer. He doesn't know how to operate a computer, so there's that. He's vowed that he'll never own a cell phone in his life, and he's kept true to that word. What happened with that was it was a lot of different factors involved. When he yes, he came into the, when he was really seriously considering running, it was late in the nominate, or about halfway through the nomination process. So that's always a little trickier had he, decided to do that earlier. But he also felt like, look, I'm also, like, as you just said, I'm a proven candidate who's won. I'm not just somebody deciding to jump on the ticket for the sake of being on the ticket. So let's really sit down and talk about, getting behind me and doing this and making this work. And he really, he has love for the Green Party. He likes their principles. He likes what they stand for. My father's a huge environmentalist. People forget that when he ran for mayor before governor and was mayor of the 6th largest city in the state of Minnesota, he ran because a developer was trying to destroy wetlands and was essentially using the city council as a rubber stamp to do that. And in fighting that, even though the entire city, the entire area where this was going to happen, petitioned city council saying we do not want them to put in curb and gutter and destroy the natural wetlands of the area, they said no. And that's when my father said, you're going to make me run for mayor. And then they said, you can't win. and he ended up beating a 56-year incumbent.
Holy shit.
That kind of parts of Jesse's history that people don't really remember. But what happened with that was there were some personal things that not involving politics or any of that kind of came up that in the era of COVID and things like that Jesse knew, it would be harder to do. I mean, because of the rules of our elections and things like that, obviously, you can't really be working another job and that other job where he, has healthcare and things like that. You would have to have abandoned his healthcare
which is just such a layer for everybody, right? And we talk about this on the show. It just shows how deep the gravity of the situation is. Obviously, your father's an individual with means to, and if a regular average working class person was, obviously they would face the same problem. It just shows, how insulated the political class is in this country.
Yeah. And he couldn't, and that was one of a few reasons that it just kind of became this thing of, it just really didn't pan out. Like, there was just a lot of, and then he discovered how much kind of, I guess, infighting was going on within the Green Party. And it just kind of became a something to where it's like, in his mind, it's like, we either got to be 100% as a party or we're not. And if we're not, we're never going to beat the other two candidates. The thing that he learned from running in Minnesota under the Reform Party ticket, then later, became an independent and all that, was that the entire Reform Party ticket in Minnesota was unified behind him. And if you don't have that sense of unification behind the candidate that you're going to run, regardless of whether that's Jesse Ventura or Howie Hawk or whoever that may be, it's going to be, you can't win as a third party because that when everything's, like I mentioned earlier, when everything's tribalized then within the party, like you're never gonna.
So what solutions do you see, Tyrel? What are you thinking as far as, electoral success? Obviously you're, not a fan of the two-party electoral system. I don't think any of us are. No. What are your thoughts on, coalition building on the left, right? It's something Gavin and I have been talking about a lot. There's obviously been infighting, amongst all these fractions you've kind of alluded to, the movement for a People's Party or DSA or Green Party or any of these things. And, one of the things that we keep going back to on this show is like, I'll vote for the Green or the ham cheese sandwich fucking party as long as they're going to vote for healthcare and, a fair wage and, and these massive wars. You know what I'm saying? Like from a policy standpoint, I could give a fuck what you call yourself. You know what I mean? So what's your thoughts on the best way to move forward like this? Are you excited by the movement for a People's Party? Are you more skeptical? Where's your head at on our ability to kind of draw a through line between all these efforts, whether that be DSA, Green Party, People's Party?
Well, I think do I have an opinion on what's going on right now? I don't simply, on that thing, because at the end of the day, I'm not a party member. It's right.
I guess my question to better frame that would be, how do we as a left, grapple with that and kind of build solidarity amongst all that? Because you're right, Gavin and I are also not members of the People's Party. Or anything like that. So I just wonder.
I think what it is this it gets back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. We really have to start seeing people as allies, even if we disagree with them. Maybe 1 out of 4 times. Yeah. If they hold the general core beliefs that we stand by, we have to start saying, look, if we're all just going to be fractured in these little fiefdoms, you're not going to accomplish a damn thing. And now I don't know if that's going to take kind of a few really galvanizing, once in a century type figures, like you saw with Martin Luther King back in the civil rights era. So, maybe it's something of that, or, it really just has to be, look, they want us to be infighting. They want us to be fighting amongst ourselves. They want us to constantly be saying, well, my ideology is better than your ideologies, or, oh, you're just not quite left enough for me, or from the other side of that argument as well, you're too left for me. Yeah. We have to start looking at the basic human principles of saying, like, are these the 3 tenets that we all agree on? Great. All right, well, let's start actually trying to build and make those 3 things happen. How do we do that? Well, we have to build a party around that, or or maybe I've always been a big proponent. I don't know if we'll ever see it, but I'm a big proponent of saying, why even have parties on the ticket? Why don't we just abolish political parties in general and just like have people run as an individual? Now, that doesn't mean that you could still, maybe you still have the Democrats or the Greens or whatever it is, and maybe they can endorse people or be like, something of that nature. But you get rid of this idea that you have to be tied to a party to run for office. I mean, it doesn't say that in anywhere. We've kind of built the system into that, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's, are you a citizen and are you of a certain age? Yeah. And I think that the other element of that, and I don't, how we do that and how we get that going. Again, it's all steps, it's all steps that we have to fight for. But I think that at the end of the day, I'd rather see no parties next to somebody's name, because that also creates a lot of voter apathy. If somebody says I'm Green Party, or somebody says I'm Libertarian, or somebody says I'm Democrat or Republican, they might not know who all the down ballot people they are that they're voting for. They just see the R next to their name, or they see the L or the G or whatever. And that person, it doesn't make a voter actually put in the time to say, who the hell am I actually voting for, beyond the fact that they're just affiliated with the party that I choose to align my beliefs with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the independent path versus even the third party path. And we've talked to some candidates on the show that certainly feel that way. They feel that, even if you were to introduce another third party into the mix. I remember actually we were talking with independent candidate Steve Cox from California, and he made a funny analogy. He was like, there's already two parties like fighting over a piece of meat. It's like two dogs fighting over a piece of meat. If you're going to add a third one, it's just adding a third dog to that fight.
No, I will say this. I do see the way our politics is going. What party becomes what, I don't know. But I do see that I would be shocked if in 10 years, let's say, maybe 15, that we don't actually have four parties in this country.
It does seem like things are going that way. People are sick of the fucking Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing the Republican Party being split between the Trumpers and the standard George Bush Republicans. You see the left now being kind of split between the progressives of the party who are. And by the way, I got to say that the true activists on the ground of the left are really like the organizers and things like that. They've done a hell of a job over the last, 5-10 years of really getting, we see a lot of fighting and things like that, but to think that in today's day and age that we're, fight for minimum wage and healthcare for all and things like that, they're legitimate conversations that people are having now that I don't think you'd have had 20 years ago. I think there's a lot of love that we got to give to those people who've been, kicking it on the ground and doing the hard work, rolling the sleeves up, not just doing interviews, that are fighting real hard, and making things happen on a local level. And I think let me get to that too. We get so seduced by national politics all the time. We're very seduced because it's like American Idol. It's like, this big name, who's in Congress, who's president, all of this. The biggest change that you can see and that you can tangibly feel is who's your mayor, who's your city council, who's your sheriff, who's your governor, who's in your state legislature. Those decisions that are made on a local and state level affect you way more than decisions made on a national level on your day-to-day lives. And truthfully, I think it's this. I think if you want to see, real change start taking place, especially for some of the big items that you mentioned, you got to start fighting for that on a local level first. My dad always said, it's like, you got to chop out the legs of the giant before chopping off the top ain't going to do shit, because it's harder to climb.
Look what's happened with legalizing cannabis. It's not like that was a nationwide decree. It's been a snowball effect. Started with Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, I think. And now it's, it's out of control. It's going to be legal before we know it all around the nation. So I think there's absolutely something to be said for that model. And we were actually just talking with some activists on our show from a group called Whole Washington, which is actually doing exactly that. They're fighting to ensure single payer Medicare for all, essentially on a statewide level for the state of Washington. And were they to succeed in that, what a shot across the bow for the movement. All of a sudden, other states, I want to move to fucking Washington. I'm going to go get some healthcare. Like,
you hit the nail. Hit the nail on the head. Look at what the activism and what the boots on the ground work that those folks who did to legalize marijuana in various states, look at the accomplishment that they did. And now look, people might argue with me, but I kind of believe the Biden and Harris and the way Congress, I think that probably in the next year or two, they might federally legalize.
Well, with that Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker bill that's going through, I think and I wonder how much, and this is, I mean, not something I'd planned to ask you, but I would like to get your insight on. How much of that do you think is Chuck Schumer's afraid to get primaried by AOC?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, and I imagine it is. Plus, look, we're facing a massive economic downfall from COVID. They got to figure out something to recharge the economy of this
New
country.
York needs that. I mean, New York needs that money.
Exactly. And they're looking around saying, you know what, the state of Illinois in June of 2020, I think it was May or June of 2020, during the height of lockdown and COVID and all that state made $71 million off the cannabis industry.
They were charging like $30 for a gram of weed in Chicago.
Yeah, $71 million in taxes off of that. Now, you at the height of the lockdowns, you know, and I think that other people saw that, you know, the people, decision makers saw that and said, boy, what a great way to kickstart, you know, our economy right now. We might need to put that into motion, especially as we put kind of hopefully get COVID under control. We got to have something somewhere. And you know, I've always been a firm believer that if you get, you know, lift the ban, get rid of the ban on marijuana, create those jobs, create those industries. And then I think you can do the same thing with green industry. And then suddenly look at that. You have massive amounts of employment on an FDR level. You have people suddenly earning good wages with a lot of jobs out there. Now, there's going to be a fight to make sure we keep big corporations out of it. I mean, look, I'll tell you the truth. I mean, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but Monsanto has been secretly over the last few years just putting their claws into the cannabis industry.
Yes, and Philip Morris was doing the same thing. I read.
Yeah, and that's another reason that the legalization is inevitable, is because these corporations now have their paws all over it, and they're wanting to make that money. They already are making so much money. But yeah, that's definitely, I think, in the cards. And I would agree with you that if they don't do it, the Biden and Harris administration, they're complete idiots. I mean, it's a bipartisan issue. It's extremely popular. Joe Biden talks about, you know, reaching across the aisle. That's an issue that literally Republicans and Democrats both want, let alone independents, obviously, and, you know, everyone else in between. But
it's easy to pass, and the fruits of that will be felt across the country in a very positive way, and everyone's going to come out shining from that.
Also, something that I've been talking about that I don't understand why we're not doing more of. It's like hemp is the most you can make anything out of hemp. You can make houses out of hemp. You can make,
it would be great for farmers who are struggling right now.
Literally take care of the deforestation problem by just making everything out of domestically grown hemp, toilet paper, every kind of paper product. It's so fucking obvious, and it infuriates me that we have this obvious solution that would empower our own domestic farmers, our rural areas, but we're not doing it at the expense of, you know, the Amazon rainforest.
Exactly. Well, you know, who needs that?
Yeah.
No, it is ludicrous. And, you know, but look, I you know, a lot of it's let me say this, doing Hawks for the last 6-7 years, I think I've been doing the show now. And before that, you know, I did another online show, a YouTube show called Buzzsaw. And then before that, it was Conspiracy Theory with Zac Ventura. You know, I've been up to my neck in probably the worst aspects of politics and human society for a long time. Yeah. And so it's hard not to get very cynical about the future. It's hard not to kind of, you know, when we talk about all these issues and then, oh God, but then Monsanto's involved in cannabis. No, you know, it's hard not to see nothing but darkness in front of us. But I will say this, I'm 41 years old. I have so much faith in the millennials, Gen Z, and the generations coming now after me. I really do feel that, you know, all those folks, I've pardoned the use of the term kids. I shouldn't say that, but you suddenly say it as you get older. But all those kids are incredible in what they're accomplishing. And they're about to inherit, in general, more wealth than the world's ever seen.
Well,
and
one thing I wanted to
make up half the voting block. They've actually equaled the boomers in the voting block now. That's power, man. That is power for change, and I really have a lot of faith in those generations that they're going to carry us through, more so than mine and the ones and like the boomers and those above me.
Yeah, they're like communists.
Yeah, that feeds into the last question that I had planned for you, and that was because I was watching your show a few days ago, and you made a hilarious joke that was actually more of like an observation of reality, right? Which was the fact that if the a stimulus check for this year goes out for 2019, financial information. It's like your doctor using your health records from the year before you got cancer to treat you, which was hilarious, but also so apt and, almost not satire that like it hurt to laugh so hard. But anyway, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned Gen Z, right? So, people who are in Gavin and I's age group specifically have hit a unique issue, which would be we're the age group that was graduating from college right into COVID-19. So May of last year, Everybody was graduating into basically economic turmoil, moving back home with their parents. Nobody was hiring, especially, if you're, just out of your undergrad, you would have to be on-site trained in just about any profession you were going into. So there was, a huge vacuum of job opportunity, right? And, obviously, considering the precarious situation of so many others, Gavin and I are in relatively fine spots. But all of those people who went from being, 2019 dependents in their last year of of college to now being in their first year of adulthood in a pandemic and the worst financial recession ever, and they've not been eligible for any of the stimulus checks, and it's about to be repeated again. It's just the incompetence of that is what is fueling this, frankly, radicalization. It's not even radicalization. It is just a demand that the government actually be held accountable to its people, right? We all pay taxes, yet we haven't received any of the fucking stimulus that's been returned back to, thousands of other Americans who admittedly also need it. But yeah, it certainly does feel like you're getting the shaft when, like everybody else got $1,800. What the fuck?
It's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. And I feel a lot for you guys. I mean, my generation, we got suckered into the college scam and said, hey, go to college, build up a $40,000-$50,000 debt that 20 years later you're still not going to pay off. I was lucky. You mentioned Sean Penn. I guess now looking back, I was lucky. I didn't end up going to college. I went out and worked in Hollywood. But
that's its own college.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, but out of that strife, look at how political you guys are. Look at how in tune. You guys probably know more about the issues than I do, on a lot of things, and I'll give you that credit. You guys are in the catbird. You guys are in a perfect position to truly change the world for the better because you've got the numbers, you got the energy, you got the intelligence and the spirit and the communication to do it. And it's up to you guys to really say no more. We want it this way. And to really look to your own and start electing, start getting behind people that you truly believe in, who can speak to that, who are younger, who are going to bring in the fresh ideas, who are going to say no more of the old way of doing things. You guys, I'm not just shining you guys on. You guys as generations truly have seen the worst aspects of this version of capitalism that we live in, this empirical society, this empire-based kind of society. But you also have the strength to change it. And I think that you see it more so than many other generations prior. I mean, I would be shocked if we didn't see, we're already seeing a massive cultural revolution take place thanks to the millennials and Gen Z, from things like Me Too and LGBTQ rights and things like that, vital things that we need to see happen. And there's no reason that you guys can't change the world unless you guys give up that fight, and that's the most important, beautiful thing that people need to remember.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate, your optimism, Tyrel, and those kind comments about us and our generation. And obviously the reason why we started the Vanguard is to empower, voices that are on the vanguard of these political ideas that are really trying to forge a new path forward for our country to hopefully disempower corporate America and, empower the proletariat. So we really appreciate, this conversation. It's been absolutely illuminating and, just a personal treat too, as a longtime fan of your show and obviously of your father's work and his show on RT as well, honestly. So we're hoping that we can do this again at some point, Tyrel.
Yes.
It's such a great conversation, like I said, and we thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Great. And also big fans of the show. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you guys, and keep up the great work out there. And just always remember, don't get caught up into the hustle of clicks. It ain't about the clicks; it's about the message.
That's a very good message.
Sage advice for sure.
Yeah, something all YouTubers need to hear for sure.
But no, thank you very much. And anytime, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys and chop it up. It's great stuff.